Hey, what's going on, everybody? Max here with BB, and today for 10 Minutes Max, we're going to be addressing the age-old question that is so popular these days. Is the cycle top potentially in? Now, here's the truth. Nobody knows for sure. The cycle has been very similar to previous ones and also very different in a lot of ways. I'm going to outline some of the things that have me a little bit worried and some of the things that I'm really not so worried about, and paint a picture for, yes, both the cycle top potentially being in case, maybe dissecting some stuff you've already seen kind of all around X, and if we're going to recover from this little gully that crypto finds itself in right now. So, but let's not waste any time. Let's get into it, guys. Let me pull up my chart here. So, and then also kind of give my real thoughts on, where we are potentially vulnerable. Like I said, we're going to talk about some of the stuff that, maybe is slightly concerning, and then also some of the stuff that gives me confidence, right? So I'm going to outline a few scenarios. So Bitcoin has obviously, really done well over the past couple years. So, something I see thrown around quite a bit is, this cycle in duration, comparing it to previous cycles, the top should more or less be in, or like very close, right? If this cycle from bear market low to, cycle top is in, this should be the end. And also, kind of as it compares to the Bitcoin halving, the time from the Bitcoin halving, through where we are right now would indicate if this cycle is the same, then the cycle top should be in. So I actually have this script that I made uh, many, many months ago. All right. I think some of you probably have access to it. But this is the Bitcoin halving cycles indicator. Okay. So what it does, I'll zoom out a little bit here, is it plots the Bitcoin halvings on the chart. Those are the black vertical lines right there. So you can see halving one, halving two, halving three, halving four. And then it breaks down via time, different periods following a Bitcoin halving, and it shades them by color. And something we can do is, I have it broken down into 20 periods right now. We could break it down into 5. And, you'll see you've got your green phase, light green phase, dark green phase, blue phase, orange phase, dark orange phase, right? So break it down into 5. We could break it down into 10 different phases, right? Just to kind of give you a very easy to identify view slash trend, how Bitcoin moves before a halving, right after a halving, into a bull market, and then kind of transitions into a bear market. So this is one thing that I think, needs some consideration. I'm going to switch back to 20 periods here. And then also this thing on the right here, it takes an average return from each one of the periods that it's in. Now, this is something that you guys have all seen online, right? People are saying, from your Bitcoin halving, this is about the same amount of time as previous cycles. So, here was, I guess, the 2016-17 cycle, just kind of going based off of time from the halving, to the cycle peak was 525 days, 546 days. And then, this time around our cycle top so far, since the all-time high was right here, early October, been 539 days, which is incredibly similar to, the previous cycles in comparing the times from the Bitcoin halvings all the way through. And then we could look at it a little differently here as well and say, like, okay, what about from, the cycle bottom, which on certain exchanges it's a little bit different, but like this was the cycle bottom, 2018 through the top over here. So 1,064 days from bottom to cycle top. And then it kind of depends. There's a couple ways to look at this one, because on this chart, this wick, here technically went below, but on other exchanges it didn't. But I think this was more or less your cycle bottom. So again, 1,064 days from bear market bottom in 2015 all the way through the cycle top. 1,064 days, and the other one was about 1,064 days. And again, I'm on the weekly chart, so if I went down to the daily, they wouldn't be exactly the same, but you get the point. Now, this time around, cycle bottom to cycle top happened about here. This was the low, right? So it's something like this, right? Where you're kind of at that, 1,064 again, right? And then if you look at my indicator here, you can see that, what's something that each one of these cycles has had in common? Well, the very Pico Schmico top was in the purple phase, period number 8, post Bitcoin halving. So from bear market bottom through cycle top, and then from halving through top, 1,064 days, and then 525 days. Last cycle, 1,064 days, 546 days. So slightly different, but again, I'm on the weekly time frame. So we're within, give it like a week either way, right? But pretty close. Purple top, right? And then bear market low, FTX bottom, Bitcoin halving. We're now in the purple zone, 1,064 days from the bottom, and then 539 days from the halving, which is super, super similar to the previous two cycles, right? So this is something that maybe you've seen people talking about the length of the cycle and how the cycle top is in, because look at the time it took from bear market bottom and Bitcoin halving through the global cycle peak in the previous two cycles. This is a decade's worth of data. Look at where we're at right now, right? And it's a good point, right? Like, this is something that we need to be aware of because it's happened twice. You only have two data points. It's not like we have 20 cycles to go off of and we're 20 for 20. Okay. We're 2 for 2 so far. And as we're looking at it like this, right? The first cycle was a little bit different, but Bitcoin was at the beginning of the cycle $12, right? So I'm just, again, I'm even further kind of making my point is that I'm cherry picking here because it also doesn't work with this cycle, right? The amount of time from the actual first cycle, Bitcoin halving, this was 364 days from the halving to the top, where the other ones were 500. And then from bear market bottom, when Bitcoin was $2, right? Bitcoin was literally $2. 742 days. So I'm kind of making my own point is that I'm even cherry picking the data to kind of paint this image, right? We have really two data points that suggest maybe from a only time-based perspective, the cycle top should be in, right? We're in our purple phase, phase 8. And if you cherry pick it and you just look at the last two cycles, you'll see that from bear market bottom through the cycle peak in the previous two, it was about 1,064 days from the halving on, and then 525 from the halving to the top. So that's kind of what people are talking about, right? So it's something you need to be a little bit aware of, okay? But I think it's early to call, right? We have two data points. I think it's really early to call. Something else that is materially different about this cycle is that we haven't had an alt season, okay? We've had certain spurts of altcoin outperformance, but we haven't had alt season, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So this is others dominance. So what it is it's a percentage based chart. It's showing you TradingView has an aggregation of altcoins. Just the ticker is others, and it's just everything outside of the top 10 by market cap. So it's basically, a shitcoin ETF. And this dominance chart right here is a ratio of how much of crypto, these altcoins represent. Okay. So really simply put, and some of you guys already know this, when this chart goes up, it's alt season. When it goes down, alts are bleeding against, the top 10. Your alts are bleeding against Bitcoin, ETH, Sol, BNB, the majors, right? The big boys, the big ecosystems. Now, something that's been different about this cycle, and I'm going to hide this table really quickly. Something that's been different about this cycle is we haven't had an alt season yet, right? People will say to me, well, we had alt season. It was, in 2023 and 2024. Well, this was your top last cycle for alt season, right? Where alts were outperforming Bitcoin late stage in the cycle. And this was the alt season they're talking about. This is when, things like Pepe really ramped up like crazy. Again, so many altcoins. Like I just mentioned Pepe because we were covering it here on this channel, literally during this move. But we haven't had an alt season like we have in the past. Oops. Let me delete that, clean up the chart a little bit. So again, you look at these charts in terms of cycles, right? So you've got your halvings. We already went over the duration. We went over, the phase that we're in. You can clearly see, purple top. Right now we're in the purple phase right here, okay? And we went over, the length of the cycles. Something that's been materially different about this cycle is as Bitcoin, kind of transitions into like the orange to red phase over here. What we've got in the past for others' dominance, which is, altcoins outperforming Bitcoin, is in this orange, red, purple phase. You've seen altcoins do pretty damn well. All right. You've seen altcoins do pretty well. Post Bitcoin halving in the orange, kind of this late stage Bitcoin cycle as we transition into kind of like the purple region. Okay. Same thing over here, right? The orange phase begins over here for Bitcoin. And what did we see? We saw others' dominance basically going straight up in a straight line. Like this others' dominance went from 5.79% to 20%, right? In a matter of like 4 months. This was major altcoin outperformance. So Bitcoin went from, 25K to 70K and alts just went crazy. What have we seen this cycle? Well, orange phase began over here. We're in the purple right now. What we've seen this cycle is nothing but disappointment, right? We haven't had an alt season. We haven't had a rotation down the risk curve. We haven't had beta chasing like I thought that we would, like most of us thought that we would. We could kind of, debate back and forth for hours, why that may be. Is it Fed policy? Is it, too many altcoins? Is it dilution? Is it crime? Is it predatory market makers? Is it extraction based protocols? It could be all of them, right? It could be all of them. So this is another thing that is kind of materially different that has really thrown people, myself included, for a bit of a whirlwind where like there were times when it looked like alts were going to try to put in a bottom and they just continued to get eviscerated, right? And Bitcoin really, really has done well. So I will say this is bullish and bearish in a way. This is bearish in the sense that if Bitcoin is doing what it's done in the previous 2 cycles, meaning we're in the purple phase, we're 1,064 days from the bottom, we're 500 and some days from the Bitcoin halving. If Bitcoin is globally top tier and we never had an alt season, that is not good, right? That is a materially different cycle than we've ever seen before. Things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. But it's bullish in the sense that this may in fact be a kind of prolonged cycle where this was a very Bitcoin heavy cycle. The Bitcoin ETFs got introduced specifically right here. This was when the first ETF started trading right before the Bitcoin halving. And what we may very well see with crypto now with all these ETFs is we may see a new type of cycle. One where we don't enter a bear market where Bitcoin goes down 90% over 2 years and it takes 4 years to climb back up and make a new all-time high. It's kind of like what happens with, stocks. When the S&P 500 goes into a bear market, it lasts like typically a year. In the past decade roughly, it's been a much more short-lived, bear market. So, it's possible that we may be in some elongated cycle where we just simply haven't we haven't had alt season yet, and maybe it's coming. So there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. Either this is a longer cycle and it's different with all these ETFs and we're waiting on the Fed to, be more dovish and all these things, right? And you may still have this alt season to look forward to. At this point, I don't know because Bitcoin, again, is looking questionable, and we're going to talk about specifically one vulnerability that I've seen earlier this year that I worry about. Again, I've talked about it publicly on a space, and if you're in our Discord, we've spent some time going over it. But either you have this fun part to look forward to, and we're in an elongated cycle, or we never had alt season because this right here. This is not alt season. What this was a complacency shoulder after the last cycle top. This was a complacency shoulder. This was not your alt season, right? And an alt season in the past happens at the very late stage of the cycle when Bitcoin is getting close to a top. Alt season doesn't happen before the halving because what this was something that we've seen in previous cycles where as everything is bottoming coming out of a terrible bear market, you see altcoins actually beating Bitcoin because they're so quick to reprice out of a bear market because they got beat up so bad. It doesn't take much for them to like actually outperform Bitcoin. It's a matter of repricing aggressively off of a very distraught and battered and bruised floor of the bear market. That's what this was. Bitcoin priced off of the bear market low like this, and altcoins slightly outpaced Bitcoin, which again is what we've seen in previous cycles. Again, coming out of that bear market. Okay. So we didn't have alt season. Again, this was just a matter of cheap assets being repriced aggressively as everything starts to recover. But we haven't actually had an alt season, right? And then this chart is very much so proof of that. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. So let's move on. I want to talk about a specific scenario that, I am seeing in the market right now, and just to be clear, it's not one of those things where I'm like, you need to panic and sell everything you own. This is actually going to be leading into a discussion about how we might be in a prolonged cycle and what levels I think you need to look out for if this happens. So it's really not a prophecy. It's more of just like here's an observation that I'd like to share with you guys. Okay. So something horrific happened on October 10th. Okay. We had the worst altcoin massacre that I've ever seen in my life. There's now rumors floating around about prominent market makers that are going to be suing the largest centralized exchange in the world. Again, I don't mean to push rumors. I'm just explaining what I've seen as of recently, and I can tell you this. We've kind of been waiting to see what bodies will float to the surface after what happened on October 10th because certain altcoins literally went to zero. And we've kind of been in the dark about what really happened and who got carted out. And we're starting to see rumors that actually, in fact, a lot of pretty prominent players did get carted out, and it might take some time to resolve. So none of that really matters other than to say we need to dissect like what might actually be going on here from a technical perspective and just run a few scenarios here, okay? So something that happened here recently was Bitcoin is in this range, and it's arguably still kind of in this range. I would make the case that you're flirting with a breakdown, right? I would say range high, range low. You're kind of sitting below your range low, but I wouldn't say you've broken down yet, but you're flirting with it, okay? Now, something that happened was altcoins actually broke down over here, right? Altcoins actually, I'll change this color quick. Altcoins actually broke their structure on that October 10th flush. Do you see the difference here? So Bitcoin nuked down to its range low, right? But altcoins actually materially broke structure. Okay. So everyone's, saying, oh, well, Bitcoin's not going to follow. And I say, I sure hope not. This is the one thing that I am worried about is that we did see something somewhat similar to this earlier this year. Okay. So here's the Bitcoin range from very end of December last year. And again, this breakdown actually happened in February. And here is what happened with altcoins, okay? So in somewhat similar fashion to what we just saw, Bitcoin flushed from range high to range low. And while that happened, altcoins lost their structure, right? You see right here, altcoins lost their structure. Here, I'll actually I'll move this up onto the same chart just so we can make our drawings nice and neat, okay? So what happened here was Bitcoin was still in its range and it dropped to range low, but altcoins actually lost their structure quite aggressively, specifically on this breakdown, okay? So see, Bitcoin still holding structure and consolidating above the range low while altcoins already lost its structure, right, over here. And then what you saw was actually Bitcoin joined the party and decided to lose its range low about 3 weeks later. So now if we fast forward to where we're at right now, I'll have to just kind of readjust my charts a little bit here. All right, let me just extend these a bit. Okay, so there was the altcoin drop. And then a few weeks later, the Bitcoin drop happened. And what I can do is I can make this a different color. So make that red. So altcoin drop is in blue. Altcoins broke structure 3 weeks before, and then Bitcoin followed suit. Okay. Now, if you look at what happened over here, it's actually quite similar. Bitcoin dropped from range high to range low, and altcoins lost their structure. And what I'm worried about is that Bitcoin is potentially doing kind of what we've seen, like earlier in the cycle. And what we saw earlier in the cycle, this is a prime example, is altcoins lose structure and basically, oops, I got to move my chart so you guys can see it. There you go. So I'm not in the way. What we've seen this cycle is altcoins more reflexive, less liquidity, less institutional demand, et cetera, lose structure a few weeks before Bitcoin, then Bitcoin drops, right? So again, same thing, alts lose structure, Bitcoin holds up. And potentially a few weeks later, which is now where we're at, we're a few weeks post, Bitcoin's now starting to slide towards its range low. So this is just something that I'm not saying it will happen. It's something that as a market observer, I've seen dynamics like this before, and this is an example. Now, does this mean the cycle top is in? No. It just means that if Bitcoin does flush here, you need to potentially be prepared, right? That's all that this is. It's just a discussion based on being prepared for a scenario that may or may not happen, meaning Bitcoin joining the altcoin dump a few weeks later. Maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. Simply just pointing out something that I've seen before. Now, let's dissect where it actually dropped to. Okay, and there's something that we've been seeing all cycle. This is a free indicator that I made. I think a lot of you guys have access to it. If not, you can see my trading view. My trading view name is Max7882. You can look it up, and it's a free script that I published. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to delete these drawings. We're just going to talk about a potential Bitcoin pullback and where it would take us, okay? So this indicator here maps out the percentage pullbacks from the all-time high. And I'm going to just move these labels over a little bit so they're not overlapping. All right. So it just prints these bands and it labels, from all-time high, how far we are off the all-time high. And what you'll notice here so far this cycle is that in the two big pullbacks that we've had so far, meaning, when we topped in March and then bottomed here in August of 2024, we bottomed at this line. This line is the 30% pullback line. Okay, hopefully you can see that. We bottomed at the minus 30% line once and then twice over here, again in March to April of 2025. So about slightly over 30% correction from the all-time high. So right now, if we were to have some pullback, what could we potentially expect? Nobody knows for sure, right? I'm simply just pointing out an observation, something that I've seen in the past. Does this mean the cycle top is in? No. Do I even think we're going to drop there? I have no idea. I recognize it looks heavy. I recognize some of the vulnerabilities. We just talked about one prime example. But everybody kind of has to view things objectively, like their way, right? I don't know what you're positioned in. I don't know how you feel about Bitcoin and adoption, and it's just I'm one guy sharing my opinion, and it's a really weird time in the market. This is not some prophecy. This is not anything like that. I'm just kind of presenting you with multiple scenarios, having a discussion about Is the cycle top in? Why people think that? What I personally think, which I will get there shortly, okay? Now, if we were to get some crazy flush, it wouldn't be that outlandish to suggest we could have a 30% pullback from the all-time high. I know everybody would be like, completely in shambles. They'd be like, I can't believe we just pulled back there. This does it for sure. The cycle top must be in, max, right? That the cycle top must be in. If we come down here, the cycle top is in. And to that, I say, well, we've done it twice so far this cycle. Why couldn't we do it again and then still continue out of there, right? And actually, the biggest rallies have come out of these 30% corrections, right? Let's just take some for fun fractals, of these 30% pullbacks, right? So if we had a 30% pullback, that would be, one recovery option. And this would be, a second recovery option. I'll just change the color here to blue. Right? So this is what the two recoveries, looked like in the past, right? So the biggest rallies have come out of a discount zone, being that minus 30% region. So I also think it, perfectly aligns with what I would consider to be, high time frame weekly structure, where all cycle, like you can identify pretty easily, your weekly structures where like Bitcoin can't go below here, right? Because if Bitcoin goes below this weekly demand level, like this, then you're probably going to be breaking down, right? And now as we continue to move up and build more weekly demand, like Bitcoin can't go down below this level. Because if Bitcoin goes down below this level, and it's down here, then you've officially broken weekly structure and then it's coming down. So as far as I'm concerned, your weekly time frame pivot is right here at that minus 30% pullback. So I'm just saying, like, if something scary does happen, that's the level you're going to want to see hold. And, a prime example of like that weekly structure breaking would be, like over here last cycle. You can see pretty clearly what happened after the cycle top. This was sort of a weekly demand zone over here. And, so we printed a low, rallied out of it. We sliced through it and then tried to chop back into it, but it ended up becoming the beginning of the bear market. So that level for us right now, that weekly pivot, is going to be around here. So if something scary did happen, like it's too early to suggest that some sort of like global macro top is in and like that's it forever. It may or may not just be another classic Bitcoin pullback like we've seen now twice so far this cycle. Should be that 30% band, right? And again, I'm not suggesting that even has to happen. I'm just talking through certain scenarios. Now, the thing that gives me the most, the most, I guess, reason to be like slightly defensive. And to be clear, let me just be super clear. I'm not selling spot here. I did raise a little bit of cash, but not from like long-term, beta plays and stuff like that. I'm just going to see those through, obviously, for better or for worse. But I have sitting on a little bit more cash than I normally would right now. But what's really causing me to, just be patient here, in like what I think is going to happen is I have this system. I've talked about it a couple times on this channel. It's called the Volume Fusion Pro. I'm going to share with you guys a few of the strategies that are running. These bots run for me 24/7. I don't intervene with them. They're much better at trading than me. And I've spent about a little over a year now. It's been about a year developing this system. And this is what's giving me certain defensive vibes right now. That doesn't mean the cycle top is in. That means my bots are positioned defensively. And I'm going to show you a few of them here. Okay. So this here is what it looks like. I've got a 6-hour Bitcoin strategy. Okay. So what it does basically, I'm not going to explain exactly like what all this is because it'll take some time. But what I will do here is we'll just take a quick look at this, right? So when we're bearish, it prints this kind of orange cloud over the top of Bitcoin. When we're bullish, it prints a green cloud underneath. When we're neutral, it's yellow. No position, no conviction. We're in between all the criteria necessary to position with conviction. So just stay out of the market. Now, here are the results. Here are the results of this cycle so far with this system. Okay. So far, going back to December 1st of 2022, which is more or less the beginning of the cycle, it's taken 120 trades in a long short strategy. It's won 51.67. We'll round up 52%. So 120 trades, it wins just over half of them. And this is the beautiful part about it, okay? The max equity drawdown is 10%, okay? Bitcoin's had multiple 30% drops. So this long short strategy gives you a much cleaner equity curve. The equity curve of this system for Bitcoin here is the green one, okay? So this is the performance of the strategy. Up and to the right, slow, grindy, up and to the right, taking profit, reducing drawdown. Here's what it would look like if you were holding Bitcoin. Not bad, right? But you can see not only is our P&L higher than Bitcoin, but we don't have as severe of pullbacks as Bitcoin, right? When Bitcoin pulls back, our system holds up much better. And actually, when it drops, we can actually make money, right? On this drop over here, Q2 of 2024, Bitcoin drops, our P&L goes up. Same over here. This was the Q1 2025 example. Bitcoin dropped, our P&L actually went up, right? So much cleaner equity curve than holding spot Bitcoin, and a long short strategy. Wins over half of its trades. Very good. Profit factor of 2.33. But that's the quick summary on it, okay? Now, here's the thing. This system that we know is a fantastic trader. It consistently positions on the right side of the high time frame moves. It reduces downside volatility while keeping the upside volatility. It's a beautiful system. I just showed you the results. This system tried to get long. It did get long over here. And it actually, I'll put the trade on the chart. You can see that I've got a profit-taking system built into this, so it'll take profit before it officially flips bullish or bearish. So there's some low time frame things that, I'm not showing on here, but gets you long here, gets you out before this dump, and it's been risk off ever since over here. Shorted here, took profit here. Shorted here, took a small loss here. Shorted here, whatever. It's neutral right now, but it's in a defensive position. Okay, so think of this not as a robot, right? Although it is. Imagine this is just some trader on CT named Bitcoin Trader, 777. That was his handle. Imagine you're looking at this and he goes, yeah, this is how I've been trading Bitcoin all cycle. Here's how I've done versus Bitcoin. You'd be looking at this going, I am not fading this guy. I'm not fading this guy. His opinion clearly matters as it pertains to Bitcoin's price and performance. If he says it's time to be defensive, I'm going to at least just be a little bit cautious, right? I'm just going to at least be a little bit cautious. So that doesn't mean that the cycle top is in. No, it just means that this particular trader, Bitcoin Trader 777, is not exactly liking what he's seeing in the market. But that doesn't mean the cycle top is in, right? It just means that he's positioned a little bit defensively right now. Let me show you an ETH one. So this is the ETH one. So here's the ETH system. Looks similar to Bitcoin, but as you can see, it catches the long, then it starts going short. It catches the long, goes risk off here, long, and it's been short ever since, right? It's been defensive ever since. So there's a very clear kind of headwind that has presented itself, okay, in this market. And you can see that, and I'll show you the results for this one as well here. Why not? So I can go back to the beginning of the cycle. Go back to like, beginning, right? Kind of as the FTX drop was happening, kind of coming out of there. Here is the here's the Ethereum trader. Now not the so you guys can see it. So instead of calling him Bitcoin Trader 777, imagine there was a guy on X, and his name was Ethereum Trader 777. And he said, "All right, guys, I'm sharing my results publicly. Here's what my equity curve. I've only been trading ETH all cycle, and here's what it looks like. Right here's what it looks like. It's that green line. Here's some stats about this trader, Ethereum Trader 777. Well, his profitable trade percentage is 59%, so he wins, about 6 out of 10 trades. He's taken about 100 trades so far this cycle. He's high time frame swing trading. His max equity drawdown was 20%, while holding spot Ethereum has had multiple 60% drops. And he's up 560%. While holding spot ETH looks like, actually, you guys can't see. Let me hide my camera. You can see that holding spot ETH would have returned, 152K. So the starting balance is 100K. So holding spot ETH would have returned you, a little bit, right? Like 50%. But this guy made Ethereum Trader 777 on Twitter has dramatically outperformed holding spot ETH, right? This is his equity curve, reduced downside volatility and actually outperforming to the upside. Okay. So let me put my camera back on. There we go. This is another one of those instances where I say there's clearly a headwind in this market right now. My bots, Bitcoin Trader 777 on Twitter and Ethereum Trader 777 on Twitter, with both fantastic track records, beating basically everybody, knocking it out of the park, are both positioned defensively right now. Can that change tomorrow? Absolutely. These bots run 24/7. But that's kind of the main reason why I think maybe you need to just be a little bit cautious until we start to see some upside momentum, right? It doesn't mean that like it's all over, we're all doomed, but it does mean there's a bit of a headwind in this market right now. What I would be looking for with something like ETH is we just went over Bitcoin. ETH is kind of floating right here. Like if you look at this trend line that I had drawn on here from earlier, we're just kind of floating in the danger zone right now. Like until you get back above, this level right here, you're just floating in the danger zone. All right. And if Ethereum is going to pull back, have like a cycle pullback like Bitcoin has, a 40% pullback for ETH is going to be a little bit more standard. It should puke harder than Bitcoin, right? And that would maybe bring you down to, this band right in here, okay? So I just think that based on what I'm seeing, and I know people are going to watch this video and just be like, "Oh, he's bearish." Like if I was bearish, you would see me nuking my altcoins, okay? I'm somewhat defensive, but I'm staying invested in this market, as I think is going to be the winning strategy. But I just wanted to point out, like, there are a few things I don't like. If we're talking about trend lines here, look at this trend line, right? Why would you want to buy this when you could just wait for a reclaim of like 3,900 and be like, oh, we're looking really good? Because then we would look so good, and then we can just buy it back, and who cares if you miss a few percent, right? But like talking about trend line breaks, let's look at Sol now. This is potentially the most concerning thing that I've seen in the entire market. There's this trend line on Sol. It goes all the way back to the bear market bottom when it was $8. And look at this. Do you want to buy this, or do you want to wait for a reclaim of 185 to invalidate this breakdown? Sol's one of the majors. It's one of the major ecosystems in crypto. So when I look at this, I say, okay, Sol has this crazy trend line, right? This is an insane trend line. ETH has a similar trend line, but doesn't go, to the cycle bottom, but more of like a local trend, right? Here's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is flirting with breaking down from a trend, right? It hasn't yet. There's Bitcoin's trend. Flirting with it. Hasn't done it yet, but flirting with it. So I look at all this and I say, look, like Bitcoin's vulnerable here, ETH is vulnerable here. Sol is vulnerable here, but I'm choosing to stay invested in this market because things can turn around quickly. But I have picked up some insurance. My bots are running for me 24/7. I don't have to do anything there. I just watch them. And I think one particular, play that some people, you might be interested in or, could make some sense is we talked about this, weekly time frame pivot, right? We talked about this idea of, this level being your kind of weekly pivot here. Something that I think will, make sense is if you look at IBIT here and you view this as a range, right? If we did come down into this region, maybe some end of November, early December IBIT 50 puts, 50 strike could be a good way to, again, just buy yourself some insurance without needing to take things to, such an extreme. So, that's really it. Like it's just one of those things where you need to be prepared for both scenarios. I think staying invested in the market and being an optimist is always going to, over the long term, pay dividends. But, my bots that are really, really good traders, far better than me, are playing defensively right now. There is some stuff to be conscientious of. There is certainly stuff to be conscientious of, but it's nothing that I think, you don't need to look at this and just go, I need to be all in or all out. It's over because that's not how it works. It's too early to call that. It would only be over if something like IBIT did this, right? If the boomer ETF, let me put it in log mode, right? If the boomer Bitcoin ETF, did something like here, we can even do some trend line like this, right? Like if we broke down here, make this red. If we broke down here like this and we dropped down into here and lost this weekly pivot and couldn't get back up above 51, 52, then you're going to have a shoulder scenario and you're going to come down here. So there's no point in calling the cycle top here when we haven't even broken down yet and we've got weekly demand below us if we were to break down, right? That's all I'm saying. But anyways, guys, hang in there. Don't get too down on yourself. There is so much opportunity in these markets. And I think, one thing I'm really going to focus on moving forward is like trying to help people kind of understand my positioning a bit more. Also, I'll be sharing a lot more of how my bots are positioned moving forward on X and on YouTube. And, look, the truth is like the reality of what's going to happen is usually somewhere in between what people are saying. Bitcoin's going to 190K. Bitcoin's going to 50K. It's probably going somewhere kind of like, in the middle of the two extremes. Usually that's what happens. So there's a lot of people calling for really low right now. And there's also some people that are just like, I don't see any problem in the market. There's nothing to be concerned about, which I also think is, high enough time frame. Yeah. But, locally, like I pointed out a few things where, maybe, just maybe, there's a reason to be slightly defensive, in a scenario like this, right? But there's a lot of support below us. This is a young asset class. Stocks are looking really good. They've been ripping constantly. And I think you just stay flexible right now. I think maybe you play a little bit defensively. You recognize, do some of your own analysis, study what I was sharing, replicate it on your own so you fully understand it. And, just position yourself in a way where you're prepared for both. You are still invested in crypto, you still have exposure, but if a bad scenario happens, you're not caught completely, standing there with your pants down like, what do I do? I don't have any cash to bid. I didn't raise any funds. That's no fun either, right? So that's all I'm saying, right? Just kind of try to position for both, and hopefully this video was, somewhat helpful. But anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. We will see you guys next Monday for another 10 minutes max. Everybody have a great day. Stay safe and take care.